Hi, how's it going? Thank you all for joining us today. My name's Will, and we're here to talk today about broken engagement strategies and, better yet, how to fix them. The reality is, we're in the middle of an engagement crisis. Now, according to Gallup, only 1 in 5 employees say that they're actively engaged. Overcoming this shortfall is a top priority for HR professionals everywhere, yet here we are, talking about broken engagement. Fixing a broken employee engagement strategy takes much more than just throwing on more perks and extras. To really enact real change, you need to understand how employees are being engaged at every point in the employee life cycle. Now, when you see the entire employee experience from their perspective, identifying the weak points in your engagement strategy becomes so much easier. And we have a great guest joining us today to help us find out those weak points. Joining me today is Jennifer Krzyzewski, our Vice President of Human Resources here at Paycom. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you bet. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
This is actually her favorite part when I get to read off her accolades here. So, Jennifer, obviously, 25 years of HR leadership and experience. She's been chief in driving transformation, business-focused human capital strategies in high-growth industries to achieve efficiencies, compliance, and employee engagement. She was named by Human Resource Executive Magazine as one of the top 100 HR tech influencers in 2020 and 2021. She's also a featured blogger and hosts webinars on HR topics through the Society for Human Resource Management, HR Daily, and HR.com. Now, if you couldn't tell from her bio, we have someone with a wealth of experience joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Of course. So, before we dive in here, let's go ahead and look at our agenda for today. Now, first, we're going to clear up any confusion that you may have and answer the question, what is the employee experience? Then we're going to go look at something that is a result of disengagement, which is quiet quitting. Now, it's so much more than just a hot HR buzzword, but don't worry, we're going to talk about how to combat it within your organization. After that, we're going to look at ways to create a roadmap to success and re-engage your workforce. Finally, we'll close out talking about making a positive impact by looking at how gaining greater employee insight leads to greater engagement. And again, closing the loop there on how we fix these broken engagement strategies. Now, to get started for today, audience, we want to hear from you. We want to make sure you're engaged, you're ready to learn, so you all should see a poll popping up on your screen right about now. Now, that poll there is asking, from your perspective, how engaged is the average employee at your organization? Now, those answers range from engaged, somewhat engaged, maybe somewhat disengaged, or you feel that they're actively disengaged. And again, attendees, please don't worry about anyone seeing your responses to this or any of our other polls today. As any good piece of surveying, all our polls are anonymous, so please feel free to answer honestly here. But I do want to turn to our expert here, Jennifer. While attendees are responding here, what's an employee engagement hurdle that you yourself have faced in your career? How did you overcome that?
So there's several things that I'd like to share with the audience. I think the first thing that as I look back on my experience in HR is early on, I didn't focus on employee engagement. It was kind of an afterthought. It was more of the thinking around the more perks that we provide, the better benefits that we provide, that will lead to engagement, which that's certainly part of it, but it's not the whole picture. And unless you have a focused, intentional strategy around your employee engagement, which includes everyone in your organization, you're not going to be able to have that engagement that you're looking for. And the second part is really finding out ways to measure that engagement. You can't just simply take one survey and think, oh yes, everything's great, but how do you truly put metrics around your employee engagement and then the strategies that you need to help deal with the issues that you see?
Right, it's that mixture of quantitative and qualitative.
Right.
Of we need to be able to gauge and have a number of how engaged are they, where are they on the spectrum of engagement versus disengagement, how are we measuring that? But I think also I love that you touched on the intentionality piece, right?
Right.
It's not just throwing things up at the wall. What piece of spaghetti sticks on the wall, right? Like,
right.
What are we doing intentionally to get them there?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be an intentional effort.
Of course. So, attendees, thank you all for responding to that poll. We're going to go ahead and close that out. Now, you should see those. We can talk about different areas of the spectrum of engagement to disengagement that you're on. So, If you are in that engaged segment, congratulations. We're very happy to hear that you have done those things, you've been intentional, and that you've created an effective engagement strategy. And hopefully you'll realize that you're already doing some of the things that Jennifer and I are going to talk about today. And there will be some that you may not already be doing that you can use to further bolster and engage your workforce. Now, if you're on the lower to middle end here, maybe you might be responding with one of those disengaged answers. No worries, you are in the right exact place. We're going to go through different things that you can start today, right after you hop off this webinar, to begin steering the employee engagement ship in the right direction. So let's start by answering the question, what is the employee experience? Now, Jennifer and I know, but are you sure of what it is? Understanding the employee experience at every step of the employee lifecycle can help you better understand why engagement is high at your organization, or why it might not be so high. It could also help you identify the processes or breaks in the experience that are tanking your engagement initiatives. So many strategies and terms to explain them have emerged, and sometimes they can overlap. So keeping them straight can be a bit of a challenge. So before we dive deeper today, let's get some definitions straight. Let's start with employee engagement. Now, employee engagement is the degree to which employees feel committed to their company. Now, this influences the effort they put into their work. The employee experience is the way that employees perceive the sum of their interactions with their employer over the course of their employment. A great employee experience helps increase employee engagement. Next, we have the employee life cycle. Now, this encompasses the stages employees go through as they progress in their career with a particular company. The employee life cycle forms the basis of the employee experience map. And finally, employee satisfaction helps define how happy employees are with their jobs. So we have this wide range of phrases here, but Jennifer, how do you personally view the employee experience? How does it intertwine with employee engagement?
So I think the thing to remember here is the employee experience and employee engagement are not the same thing. The employee experience is the method to which you drive your engagement, and the engagement is the actual result. So it's really important to keep those things clear, because that really drives how you're going to put your strategies together.
Right. And again, whenever you are measuring those things, you have so many metrics, you need to make sure that the phrases that you're using across the board are straightened out, especially when you're collaborating with other departments.
Right. And when you're talking about it in your organization, you need to make sure that you're very clear about what those mean.
Right. So moving on here, obviously, Jennifer, your answer here is similar to others who have studied this, and one I do want to call out here is author and podcast host Jacob Morgans. In his book, The Employee Experience Advantage, he states the interactions employees have with their employer and how employees perceive those interactions over the course of their employment make up the employee experience, and that these interactions are divided across 3 areas. The first area is technology. Now, this includes the tools and software employees use to work and manage their HR lifecycle. The next area is their workspace. This is the physical and digital environments where employees work. So again, with these new working environments and strategies, maybe you're in a hybrid strategy, maybe people work remotely, maybe they're working in the office. Regardless if it's physical or digital, it's where they are working. The third one here is culture. Now, this is the tone, the ideas, the beliefs, and the behaviors that make a business unique. The experience begins at the beginning of the employment life cycle. This is when job candidates receive their very first message from recruiters or an HR professional that's reaching out to them. This involves into onboarding and then onto development, engagement, and retention, and finally to separation to complete the entire employee life cycle. So, Jennifer, at what point in the employee life cycle between recruiting, hiring, onboarding, developing, retaining, do you feel that it's most important to engage employees?
It's most important to engage employees at every single step in the life cycle. And you have to think about the very first time that you're touching a potential candidate for your organization. What is their experience like? Are you meeting them with the best technology? Are your recruiters presenting the organization and the opportunity in the best way? And then when you think about their hiring experience, are they easily able to move through that experience? Are they meeting the right people? Are the people they're meeting coming across in the right way? onboarding? Is there a digital onboarding experience? Are they using technology to their benefit and simplifying their lives as they onboard? And people, throughout onboarding, it's not just day one. It's onboarding should be a continual process and a continual experience for the employee honestly throughout their first year of employment, not just their first week, their first 30 days. Developing, that's a huge part of the employee experience. People want to know what steps they can take from a developing standpoint to further their career. And how do they do that? Are we meeting them where they are with the technology and the ability to take training and development just in time whenever they are available to do that? And then, of course, retention. All the programs that you put together as an HR professional to help retain the employees, not only from your compensation programs to your benefit programs, but really the overall leadership development that you have in your organization is critical, because if our leaders aren't carrying out the culture in the organization and interacting with their people in the right ways, that's going to be very detrimental to the employee experience going forward.
Right, and again, it is important to engage them at each of those areas, but I'm sure there are some people who are joining us today who are saying, hey, Jennifer, that's great, but it can be really difficult to engage them at all of those areas. So do you have any tips just off top of looking at that? And we'll go through some here later, but to kind of set the stage for us.
I think the biggest tip that I would say is that, it's always very exciting when a new employee joins the company, and it seems like there's a lot of kind of intentionality and effort around that particular, time in an employee life cycle. But it's like, don't forget, once they've been here, what are we doing to help engage them and enhance their experience? It's not just like, oh, they've started, we've got that role filled, now let's move on. We need to continue to provide those programs where they can develop, with the organization.
I think a good analogy I heard the other day was you can't just put the plant inside the planter. You have to continue to water it, fertilize it, pour into it. So thank you again for your insight there. So, and again, attendees, like we mentioned, it can be difficult to consistently engage employees at each and every stage of the employment life cycle. And many of us joining us are probably asking those questions as they deal with these issues of disengaged employees. So it truly does beg the question, is this just the way things are? Is disengagement and dissatisfaction inevitable? Do HR professionals need to stop trying to make employees happy and accept widespread disappointment? Well, surprise, shocker, the answer is no. If it was that easy, we wouldn't have anything else to talk about for the rest of the hour here. But one way that you can find out how to better engage employees is by going straight to the source. In this case, the source is the employees themselves. Getting pulse checks from multiple people that are in different stages of the employment life cycle can be a great way to get feedback on your current employee engagement efforts. And again, we have breadth of knowledge here with Jennifer. What are some of these questions that HR pros need to ask their employees? They're good questions to ask, they're bad questions to ask. Where do they need to fall in the game?
So I think when you think about the questions that you need to ask from an HR perspective, you need to make sure the questions cover, really four things: your basic needs, your individual needs, the team needs, and then the growth needs. For instance, like a basic need, do I have the tools and resources available to do my job? Has someone told me in the last week that I've done a good job? Do I have a support system at work? Do I have a best friend at work? Do I understand where my role fits in the organization, and what do I do? How does what I do contribute to the overall business strategy of the organization? So if you focus on those four areas, again, basic needs, individual needs, team needs, and growth needs, you're going to find the information that you need to help you inform what your employee experience is and what your engagement is.
Right, and again, taking that holistic look there. So we've talked a bit about engagement here, but let's go ahead and let's move on to the opposite of engagement, which is disengagement. Obviously, we're going to go look at combating quiet quitting. So let's talk about this term that, again, like I said, many of you have probably heard recently. It's like a new buzzword around the office, but what does quiet quitting actually mean? To be clear, quiet quitting is not an employee handing in their 2 weeks notice without saying anything to their manager or no door knock. Quiet quitting is when employees start doing the bare minimum of their role and avoiding any task outside of their job description. So let's go deeper down the quiet quitting rabbit hole here. Based on dwindling levels of engagement, Gallup projects that at least half of the U.S. is currently quiet quitting. The data reveals many employees, especially millennials and members of Generation Z, are less satisfied with and less empowered by their workplaces. So, Jennifer, what are some of these bigger issues that are facing employers when we're talking about quiet quitting?
Yeah, quiet quitting is a big issue. And one thing I see is that most jobs today require some level of extra effort to collaborate with coworkers and meet customer needs. The ratio of engaged to actively disengaged employees is now 1.8 to 1, the lowest in almost a decade. Managers are the one group worst affected by this. This is detrimental to an organization because there are the people who are supposed to be developing the employees and prepping them for the future, just like I talked about earlier. And if you have a manager that's quietly quitting, that can cause major problems for talent development down the road and your bench strength as an organization.
And again, if you're not developing people, you're not getting them to the retention stage, these strategies here all work together. There's no one part that is good or bad.
Right.
They all have to fit together.
You're exactly right.
And there are several factors that push somebody to quiet quit. And while many reasons exist, the most common arise when employees feel underpaid or if they feel overworked. Maybe they're consistently unrecognized, like Jennifer mentioned. No one's told me I've done a good job in a while. Maybe they're unable to find joy in their work. They're lacking the purpose and understanding how their role fits into the larger scheme of the company's mission. And it often happens when they feel like they're sacrificing too much of their personal life. Regardless of the reason, they all have to do with the feeling of being undervalued. So, what causes quiet quitting? Now, we can actually break that list of factors that we mentioned into 4 main areas. Those 4 main areas are compensation, unclear responsibilities, unnecessary overtime, and hustle culture. So, Jennifer, I want to get your 2 cents on each of these issues. How might employees feel undervalued when it comes to compensation here?
So with compensation, employees who quiet quit don't find the investment that they put into their work reciprocated from the employer. Some causes may even be out of the organization's control, like inflation or some unexpected life event, but these external factors make even competitive pay sometimes feel insufficient.
And then our next section, or our next factor here, group, is unclear responsibilities and unnecessary overtime. How do these play into quiet quitting?
And they definitely play into it. In times of need, the lines between job titles can blur. Labor shortages and other emergencies may compel leaders to lean on their best employees. It's so easy to go to your go-to person, but that can cause problems. But if it doesn't take long for a temporary need to morph into an unreasonable expectation, if an employee finds themselves training every new hire or routinely addressing issues outside of their responsibilities, they're going to start asking questions, and their fatigue compounds when the pressure to do more and more and more is not backed up by any sort of incentive. Verbal praise is great, but it's superficial when it's not supported by that tangible reward. And with regards to overtime or unnecessary overtime, it's not a stretch for someone to fight back against unreasonable hours. Even more so if there's no meaningful reason behind it. There's nothing any worse than feeling like, I've got to work overtime. I don't really know why, but they're just making me do this. Certain industries like healthcare and emergency response don't always have the luxury of a normal schedule, but even workers in these fields still expect personal time. In a morning consult survey commissioned by Paycom, employees said work-life balance is the most important factor to job satisfaction, even over benefits and pay.
Right, and I think that helps us kind of round out this area here, looking into hustle culture here, because this was once a trend, but it's really leading to burnout and so much more in the workplace. So what are the issues around hustle culture and employees feeling undervalued?
Yeah, hustle culture really was a thing, and it's really led to a toxically positive environment, and what it means is the picture that you have to be happy to succeed. You have to push yourself beyond the limit. And the intent behind such a philosophy is positive, but it very rarely equates to having any sort of healthy lifestyle. If a hustle culture champions work as life, quiet quitting argues work is strife, right? Success is dependent on effort, but it also relies on chance. Employees who hustled for several years without anything to show for it may begin to wonder, is it all worthwhile? Is the grind worthwhile? Instead, they may enjoy the same result by simply just coasting along. Neither promotes a happy medium, but quiet quitting offers a path of least resistance. At the same time, hustle culture fails to consider mental health, which is huge.
Right, and that's an area that I'm happy to say that a lot of companies, ours included, is really digging into and focusing on and making sure that the employees here are, happy and healthy in all aspects of their life.
Right.
And so digging into that area of mental health the mental health within the workplace, what steps can people working in HR right now take to help employees' mental health, help them feel that it is valued and that their voices are being heard there?
It's mental health in the workplace is so important, and if you as an HR professional or listeners out there, if you're not focused on that, you really need to take a step back and say, well, how do I get focused on this? Because this is a huge part of the strategy for HR professionals. I mean, organizations should strive to give employees time, choice, flexibility, so they can devote their finite energy when and where it's needed. That means giving employees a chance to voice what they need and what they actually need from their work. That said, be careful, because placing the responsibility of maintaining the ideal balance on employees isn't helpful either. Even if a business can't deliver a perfect work-life balance all the time, it can at least protect its employees' mental and physical health. And that starts with a healthy environment backed by an effective well-being strategy.
Right. And I love that part that you mentioned of making sure that, I think a good way of saying it is making sure you're making the space
right,
for
absolutely.
those people. It's not, hey, well, you need to focus on this. I'm not going to help you with that. Like, how do we be intentional and make that space there?
Right,
so.
Absolutely. Intentionality is exactly where it needs to be.
So, attendees here, we've done a lot of talking, so I do want to pause for another moment here, and we can get a little more engagement from our audience today. So, you should see that poll popping up on your screen right about now. This next one is asking, do you feel your organization is experiencing or has experienced the effects of quiet quitting? Your two options there are yes or no. Now, while attendees are responding, Jennifer, is quiet quitting, we've just talked, it's nothing new. It's not something that's popped out of nowhere, but this is something that businesses have maybe faced before, but not on this scale. What's your POV? What's your take here?
Quiet quitting has been around for decades. It's certainly nothing new. I think organizations are more open to talking about it today, and with the different types of engagement strategies and surveys, it can become more apparent. Maybe in the past it was a little bit buried, a little bit deeper in the organization, but just like many things in the workplace, a decade ago we weren't talking about those things, and quiet quitting is one of those things that we're talking about, because it can be very detrimental to the organization in so many ways if you're not thinking about it and coming up with strategies to help prevent that.
Right. You might have only found one, maybe two employees that've got their little nap cubby or some weird closet just tucked away in the building, but this is becoming more and more prevalent. And I think too, the talk around our technology, how we're using technology in the workplace too.
Oh, absolutely. Technology plays a huge part of that.
Exactly. So attendees, that poll will give you just another moment here. So again, is your organization facing or feeling the effects of quiet quitting? Either yes or no there. So we'll give that poll one more moment here. All right, let's go ahead and close that out. So attendees, whether or not you are feeling that your organization is suffering from quiet quitting or not, it's certainly something to keep in mind, as the quiet quitting wave happens across an organization in a domino effect. And so as this starts happening on some teams, it really does have the potential to spread like wildfire. So again, however you can stop that and continue people, getting them to feel engaged within your workplace, obviously, always good attempts and options there. So now that we've gone through some of the results that come with a poor engagement strategy, let's look at how you can evaluate your current strategy and get on the path towards success. First, let's go back to the idea of stages that we mentioned earlier. On your screen, you should see an example of how the stages of the employee lifecycle fit together over the lifetime of employment. Now, these stages make up the foundation of the employee experience, and again, within each stage, several phases can exist, but we'll get into those later. I do want you to know that your map may vary based on the intricacies of your business, but we'll use the one that we have displayed on the screen for our conversation today. So, Jennifer, on the screen we have a chart that we use to map out the second stage of the employee journey, which is onboarding. Now, attendees, you can see on the top row, we've detailed what the new hire is doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're needing, and what they're wanting during this stage. That's what we're mapping out here. Now, on the second row, you should be thinking about and thinking through what the company is doing to help during this process. And then after that, there's another row where you would list 3 steps you or any other HR professional that is working in this stage can take to help improve a new hire's experience. Now, what we've talked through on the screen is an abbreviated version of the onboarding stages because, unfortunately, attendees, we don't have time to go through everything here. This can be a process that takes hours, a couple days, but is really important for you to do within your own organization so that you can see each of these steps in the entire employee life cycle. But this abbreviated version should give you an idea of where to start. Now, this document is included in our white paper that's also available for download, titled How to Fix Broken Engagement Strategies. You can find that on our website, paycom.com, and navigate over to the resources section. But to help us complete this document review, let's fill out one of the areas of the orientation section here. So, Jennifer, will you help us fill out the bottom part of this and share your 3 steps that you would suggest any HR professional could do to improve their new hire orientation?
When I think about new hire orientation, I think about it in terms of not just one day, like I mentioned earlier, but I think one area that companies probably miss the boat on is in that first week of a new hire is really helping them understand what the company does. How does their job fit into the overall business strategy? Because that lead there's a direct link between that and employee engagement and employee satisfaction. The second thing that I would say is helping new employees understand the values of your organization and how that they contribute their behaviors on a daily basis as they execute their roles. How do those behaviors contribute to the company's values? Do they understand what the company stands for? And then the last thing that I would say is making sure during that first few weeks of someone's onboarding, they understand where their learning and development opportunities are. How can they learn more about the company, more about themselves, more about their particular role, and how do they do that? Do they have to enroll? Is there a digital learning that they have to go through? What are some of those intricacies around their learning and development that they can understand kind of out of the gate? Because what you're doing in those first few weeks of new hire orientation, or even if you only have a new hire orientation for a day, is you're building that trust and that connection with the employee, and that's so important to build that at the very, very beginning, because within the first 30 days, that person is going to decide if they want to stay working for the organization.
Right, getting them there, getting them to the show, that's just the first part.
That's the
first step there. So we just looked at a small portion of the onboarding stage right here, but again, attendees, you can do the same thing to examine different stages of the employee life cycle as well. And frankly, you should. Sitting down and looking at your own employee life cycle in this way can really help you see where in the life cycle your engagement strategy may be broken. And for some of you joining us today, this may look familiar, and it's probably because it is. It's similar to a customer experience map. So, like we've said, mapping out the employee experience is a lot like tracing the customer journey or creating a service blueprint. So now that you know what the employee experience is, it's time to take the first step and go map it out. Maybe you host a pizza party with your team where each of you takes a different stage, you fill it out, and then pass it around the table for everyone else to review and add their own feedback. The possibilities are endless, and feel free to get creative here, but the result of all these things will be an improved employee experience, which in turn drives greater engagement. Because understanding this life cycle from the employee's point of view can help you understand what they need from every interaction that they have with your company. This can also help you identify the gaps and see why your employees aren't engaged. Because once you know that, you can figure out how to meet those needs and how to boost engagement. So, Jennifer, how can HR professionals get greater buy-in from leadership to show the importance of mapping out the employee experience, right? You may have a group that understands the importance, they want to help these employees out, but maybe it's not being made a priority or they're not being given that space to do that.
No, I love this question because if you don't have the right employee experience and the right level of employee engagement, you're going to have turnover and you're going to have productivity issues. So the best way to link that back to leadership is to show the cost of turnover in the organization, the cost of not meeting productivity goals if you have a disengaged employee or someone who's quietly quitting. So it's really a bottom line issue for the organization. If they're not focused on the employee experience and employee engagement, then there's going to be a significant cost to the organization down the road.
Right. And I think that'll make any CFO pay attention, right?
Right, absolutely.
You got to get their attention. The dominoes the rest of the way fall there. So.
Right.
By mapping out all the stages of the employee journey, you can create a roadmap towards success and improve your own engagement strategy. I think another important factor here in boosting engagement is transparency. So let's go ahead and close out our conversation today by taking a look at transparency's ability to positively impact engagement. Now, in a world where transparency and trust can make or break organizations, employees have to be empowered to manage their own data. And yes, that does include their payroll information. Now, I'm sure that sounds scary to anyone who touches the payroll process, but transparency really is the key to enhancing your organization's employee engagement strategy. Plus, it's what employees want, and you likely want to give them what they want in these certain areas, especially when it comes to transparency. In a recent Pollfish survey of 1,000 U.S. employees, 96% of them said it would be valuable to check their payroll for errors and fix them before payday. Not on payday, not when they receive their payroll, before payday. Now that's nearly all employees in America, which makes sense because who doesn't want to be paid accurately? I mean, I know I do, and I need my check to be right every time I get it. Now, in that same survey, 74% of employees said doing so, which checking their payroll before it runs, would help them budget their pay, and 64% said it would help them plan for upcoming expenses. Self-service HR technology really saves time for HR and payroll professionals, but the true benefit is far greater. Having processes in place that increase transparency can also help you catch mistakes before they happen. Like we've been talking about, your employees, you want to make sure they're engaged, and obviously payroll is a big area where they can become actively disengaged. So Jennifer, how do these payroll errors affect the employee experience?
Well, it's directly related to the trust that an employee has with their employer, and if you break that trust with your employees by providing an inaccurate paycheck that puts them in a significant bind, they are going to start questioning every single time they get paid, every 2 weeks, once a month, once a week, whatever that is. So that doubt is constantly in that person's mind every time they receive their paycheck. And so it's important to ensure that you give the employees the ability to see their paycheck prior to payday so they can correct any of those issues. And then it also, from the HR side, we don't have to deliver bad news like, oh, sorry, your paycheck's wrong. It's going to be 5 days before we can correct that. That's not good news to deliver to an employee as well. I mean, there's studies show that most Americans, if $500 or less is missing out of their paycheck, it could cause significant financial hardship, during that next 2 weeks until they, get their paycheck, their next paycheck.
Right, and I think it goes beyond that idea of, I think oftentimes this issue gets linked into, hey, the employee is upset, they didn't get that paycheck, but it really does cause a lot of issues for these HR pros who are running payroll or they're involved in the payroll process, or if you have a separate payroll department. Again, like you said, HR still has to be the bearer of bad news there. So it's twofold. It's not just someone's not getting paid correctly, but you're also, unfortunately, losing engagement.
Right,
there.
And what does that do to that experience for those HR and payroll professionals that have to deliver that news? That's not a good experience for those people in their job.
And it goes back to that unnecessary overtime, right? Hey, we could have fixed this beforehand. Why am I having to do this now?
Right.
Exactly. So, Jennifer, I think you hit the nail on the head here because there's also data to back that up, because in a recent OnePoll survey commissioned by Paycom, 91% of HR professionals agreed that incorrect payroll breaks employees' trust. So not only are the employees telling you this is important, and we're also understanding that HR professionals think this is important, people who are running payroll understand that it breaks the employees' trust. So with an employee-driven payroll process, employees can enjoy peace of mind as that tech guides them to find and correct the errors before payroll runs. It goes to show that when using self-service technology and it's fully embraced, it empowers employees with agency, inspiration, belonging, and more. Now, all of these help you create a workspace where people actually want to be they want to grow, and they want to work. Remember, it doesn't matter how great one stage or one phase of the employee experience is if all the ones around it are bad. I know I probably sound like a broken record, but that really is this key point today, is that all your areas need to be together, because your ability to engage great employees is only as strong as the weakest phase or stage of the entire experience. You could pour all your work and all your effort into crafting an amazing employee experience, and all your efforts are unwound by something as simple as a preventable payroll error. I mean, who would want to do that? So, as we look here at next steps, if you're ready to boost engagement and reduce turnover, it's time to understand your employees' experience. Now, we've mentioned most of these at some point or another in the conversation today, but if you're a note taker, go ahead and bust out your pen and paper, or like we said, use some technology, open up your notepad there on your computer. But here are going to be some good next steps for you to recap. So, step 1 here is going to be build your map. We talked about mapping out how employees are being engaged at every point in the employee life cycle, but seriously, go do it. Go have that pizza party. Go sit down and do that. Because sometimes seeing things mapped out, like we've demonstrated here, can really help you or your coworkers, another team that you're working with, see things differently. Not everybody understands things the exact same way. So this can be a great visual aid here. But as you're doing this and going throughout this exercise, be sure to map out the phases within each stage. Look at what employees do in each phase. Look at what employees need in each phase. What you can do to help meet those needs, and also look at understanding how your job impacts the company's success. So, Jennifer, aside from these preventable payroll errors like we've talked about, what are some easily preventable breaks in engagement strategies that you see happening for other businesses today?
I think there are several things. When you don't provide the technology that employees are using in their everyday lives as consumers, if you don't provide that type of technology in the workplace, that can be very frustrating for employees. So they're spending more time dealing with administrative, paperwork on their side as opposed to doing their job. The technology needs to be easy, and they can go in and make their changes, enroll in a training class, or do whatever they need to do, and they get in and get out. I think that's important. And I think the other thing is important from an engagement perspective that businesses don't do enough of is when they're having their one-on-ones with their employees, it's not just about what's your checklist, what have you done, boom, 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 let's go through all these things. Leaders have to take the time to ask people actually how they're doing and have that genuine conversation, because that creates that level of trust that we've talked about. And it also makes that employee feel that their company cares about them. And having the feeling that your company cares about you is a very much an important step in the employee engagement process.
I think that's even a great time, right, to check in on someone and ask, hey, how are you doing? Is your mental health okay? Are you physically,
right.
Those areas too. So if you're looking for an area to make space for the mental health conversation,
that's
that
a perfect
one-on-one
place to start. Yeah.
Right. So let's move on here and look at our next couple steps here. Step 2 here is going to be identify people and processes. So people are at the center of your business and your engagement strategy and your success. So be sure to ask the people that are in charge of different processes how those processes work and what employees are doing when they're going through them. For example, if you're trying to complete the onboarding section of your map, you may ask hiring managers how that process works. Do new hires complete documents on paper or electronically? Are they able to access the learning courses that they need before they're onboarded if you're in an area where that's an issue of compliance? Maybe you have required training to do before you can get hired on. Are people spending all day in a training class, or do they have the option of that on-demand training? Is their workspace set up and ready to go when they arrive? Or do they have what they need? Do they have, a couple pens and a pad at least? Do they have the computer? Are they able to log into their computer at their workspace? Really going above and beyond and making sure that they are set up for success. Our third step here is get employee feedback. After you do this, next it's time to find out how employees feel. What do they think? what do they need during these different stages of the employee life cycle? You can do that by surveying them or maybe observing different processes in action. You can even ask employees about their experience. Number 4 is trust your gut. Do what you think you should, right? Because you're obviously a well and capable professional, an HR professional here, and you're in your position for a reason. You're uniquely positioned to make a major impact, not only on your organization, but the individual lives of the people who work at this organization and that you interact with every day. So again, trust your gut. You're here for a reason. Like Jennifer said, don't be afraid to send out the survey. Don't be afraid of doing these things. Do what you know is going to work here. So we're beginning to wrap up our conversation today, so let's recap over a bit of what we covered. Today, we first answered the question, what is the employee experience? Which, as we mentioned, both Jennifer Kay and author Jacob Morgan say it's really the interactions that employees have with their employer and how employees perceive those interactions over the course of their employment that make up the entire employee experience. Next, we looked at quiet quitting and ways to combat it. After that, Jennifer took us through creating a roadmap to success, and we got to hear her tips for a good onboarding experience, which, again, does not end after their first day or their first week or their first month. It is a continual process that continues on as they grow into that developing and retention stage. And finally, we closed out by discussing how gaining greater employee insights can lead to greater employee engagement here and some of the steps of which you need to take. So, regardless of the industry that your business is in, you can move the needle on employee engagement by using the right HR technology. And when you use the right HR technology, HR professionals are able to do their own jobs better. And the right tools help HR pros clear their plate of repetitive, manual, paper-based tasks so that they can focus on things like mapping out the employee life cycle. So, if you're looking for an HR software that's going to help you keep your workforce engaged, be able to enhance your company culture, and improve the employee experience, look no further than Paycom. Payroll is an area where employees, as we said, can easily and quickly become disengaged if it's not handled right, and this can happen especially when an employee is paid incorrectly. Part of encouraging your workforce, or engaging your workforce rather, is paying them correctly, and it's really the base of the employer-employee contract. I do this, you pay this. You can enjoy a perfect payroll every time when you use Paycom's Beti. Through our employee-driven payroll experience, employees are guided through every step of the payroll, and when employees fix their payroll before it's run, you can rest assured that it's right. And also, you're not sending your HR professionals or payroll people out to go fix things, issue maybe a rushed paper check, having to do reversals, XYZ, all the extra steps there, which this is also important that employees are able to fix their own payroll because based on a recent survey of more than 2,000 U.S. employees, nearly all of them said that they would feel a negative impact if they lost a single payroll, and nearly half would be vulnerable to poverty. That means those employees aren't able to pay things like their rent or their utility bills, and employees benefit from consistent, reliable pay. So when you use Beti, employees can find, fix, and prevent themselves from suffering the consequences of avoidable errors and help their organization dodge costly corrections, like we mentioned, voids, wire reversals, rushed paper checks, and more. Another piece of Paycom technology to help you with your engagement is our surveys tool. With Paycom Surveys, conducting confidential workforce surveys is simple and reveals information that you may not discover otherwise. With results tabulated quickly, you have the data to make informed decisions to curb turnover. Speculating about why employees quit or stay can only go so far. Our employee satisfaction survey, for example, can help you uncover what truly motivates or deters employees. You can easily measure morale, engagement, safety, effectiveness, and so much more so that you can deliver efficient operations resulting in greater retention. So, attendees, if any of these solutions or other things we talked about today are intriguing to you, please let us know by responding to this poll. You should see it popping up on your screen here. That poll is asking, would you like to see a customized demo of Paycom products related to this webinar? Your answers there are yes or no, and go ahead and respond when you know your answer, and I'll leave this poll open for just a little longer because I'd like to share some more about how Paycom has tools that you need to engage every employee. So I mentioned Beti and Paycom surveys a moment ago, but another great tool to consider is Paycom Learning. Paycom Learning is our learning management software that helps you craft and deliver exciting and engaging training materials for employees to access anytime, anywhere, on their time. With an add-on package of additional wellness courses, employees will find insight on the topics that they care about. Things like mental health, mindfulness, even nutrition courses on work-life balance, personal finance, and more. And finally, I want to call out our performance management and compensation budgeting tools. Now, these will help you reward and promote employees meaningfully, fairly, and all within budget because, again, like we said, we need to make sure the CFO is on board here. So, again, attendees, let us know in the poll if you'd like to see a customized demonstration of Paycom products related to this webinar, and we're going to leave that poll open here for just a little bit as I pull up some Q&A questions. We've seen you all engaging in the chat. Again, thank you so much for responding to these polls and sending in your Q&A questions. So we'll have Jennifer answer a couple of these here. You feel ready?
I'm ready.
Of course you are. You came ready. So Jennifer, this first one I'm pulling up here, apologies, I'm going to be looking over here, attendees. We already run surveys with our employees, but we don't get many responses. How do we get more people to respond when we send out surveys?
I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's communicating well in advance of the survey, communicating why you're sending the survey out, and then having a communication strategy around that survey. Are you reminding your employees to go ahead and fill that out? Are you setting a goal in your organization that you want a 90% survey completion and kind of gamify it to a certain extent, which encourages people to respond? And then also making sure that you're following up after the survey, because people are less likely to respond to surveys if you've had a tendency in your organization to survey and then employees feel like it goes into a big black hole, which it probably doesn't, but maybe you just didn't communicate the results of those surveys to the employees. So it's all about communication.
Right. And if you are experiencing something like employees feeling like it does just go into the big black hole, the ether, wherever it is, what are some ways, if you've had a couple surveys like that, right? Maybe you're coming in as a new HR professional, you're trying to change things here. What are some ways that you can go back to re-engage those people who you're already facing a disengaged audience?
Well, I think it's going back and looking at what were the surveys that you sent out prior? What information were you trying to gather that you didn't gather? And reimagining that survey, reconstructing the questions, and then putting a communication strategy around that, letting people know, hey, we may have asked these questions before, but we're asking them in a different way because we really truly want to get that information.
Right. Well, whoever to the person who asked that, thank you so much. We've got an answer for you there. So Jennifer, I got about 2 more here. Okay. This next one we're looking at, aside from sending out flyers about EAPs or wellness programs, how can I better support employees as an HR professional?
Don't forget that employees are humans. I think that's so important. And really create strategies in your organization where you can meet people where they're at. And I talked earlier about effective one-on-ones and having those times when you're just asking employees, how they're feeling. And that's kind of the gateway to opening up the conversation around mental wellness. Do you have learning and development modules in your LMS where you can have programs where people can go in at any time, that's convenient for them to learn more about mental wellness, physical wellness, financial wellness, all of those things. I mean, it's not just, when you think about programs for our employees, you have to think about the whole person, and that's just more than just EAP or mental wellness. It's all of the things combined that make that person successful.
Well, thank you so much for your insight there. Our last question here, we've got time for one more, audience. We've surveyed our workforce countless times over the past 2 years, so it looks like we've got another survey question here. We've surveyed our workforce countless times over the past 2 years and have gotten tons of feedback, but our leadership is reluctant to make changes based on the responses. How can I make the case for enacting change to improve our engagement strategy?
So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier regarding communicating to leadership about the cost of not having an effective engagement strategy. And that leads to disengagement, quiet quitting, turnover. I mean, studies show that, a cost of turnover is 1.5 times the salary of a particular employee. So it's a very costly thing if you don't think about it and put strategies in place. Even if your leadership says no, do they really understand the financial impact of that? And the best way to make the case, from an HR side is to make it from a financial perspective, because those are those are usually the people that give you the approval to enact HR strategies. So I would say put your CFO hat on, your finance hat on, and make the case from a financial perspective.
Right. Before we go, I have one more Q&A of my own. Jennifer, again, thank you for sharing your breadth of knowledge with us today. Do you have any other final tips, any things we didn't cover today, anything that you want to share with people before we head out?
What I would say is, and we've talked about this, is don't underestimate the power of an employee engagement strategy. It's the right thing to do for your employees to create that world-class employee experience. And when you have that world-class employee experience, your engagement will continue to go up, and you will create that employer of choice situation for your company. And that's so important as we are always fighting that war for talent and keeping people, attracting people and retaining people at our organization. And engagement and employee experience are absolutely intertwined when it comes to those programs.
If you build it, a proper employee engagement strategy, they will come.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
And attendees, thank you all for joining us today. And I want to let you know, if you're hungry and looking for more information, Paycom also has you covered here. One resource I want to highlight is our guide on how to fix broken engagement strategies. We mentioned it earlier. Now, we've covered lots of great tips during this past hour, but there's so much more that we could dive into that is covered within that guide. So, as a reminder, the employee lifecycle map that we went through earlier is also listed in there as well. In addition, we have multiple other webinars, blogs, and other resources that you can dig into. One of those great resources is our podcast, The HR Break Room. I'd encourage you all to go listen to our episode with business strategist Seth Madison. He discusses the future of work and how to engage your workforce no matter what challenges you may face. Just head over to our website, paycom.com, and click on the resource tab and navigate over to podcast to find that podcast, or just click on resources if you want to dig into any other resources I mentioned today.